In response to our conversation with the Prime Minister, Hamas tells NBC News in a statement tonight, quote, "It is Netanyahu and his army of war criminals that have targeted and continue to target innocent and defenseless civilians. As for Hamas, every single Israeli killed by its fighters or its rockets, except one, have been soldiers in uniform, on duty, fully armed, and on the battlefield." End of quote from Hamas. Now on to the other big story we continue to follow tonight, the withering ground assault going on in Gaza, with the death toll there now topping 570, in addition to 27 Israelis killed. There are international demands for a ceasefire, but the barrage is showing no signs of letting up. Our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, is in Gaza for us tonight. Richard, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. Palestinian sources tell us that tomorrow there could be a 5-hour humanitarian ceasefire. If it holds, and Israel hasn't confirmed it, it could potentially pave the way for a more permanent agreement. And that would be welcome by many here in Gaza.
These are the final moments for 10 Palestinian fighters. Dressed in Israeli uniforms, this morning they ambushed and killed 4 Israeli troops. Here, they are trying to sneak back into a tunnel to escape. They're fired on and killed. 2 militants may still be on the loose in a nearby Israeli kibbutz. There's panic as the search goes on. The militants are never found. Israel is finding the fight in Gaza tougher than it expected. The militants better trained, streets booby-trapped. Their tunnels extensive. So Israel is using its heavy weapons, artillery and airstrikes pounding the densely populated Gaza Strip.
The injured continue to arrive at Gaza City's main hospital. This services hundreds of thousands of people, and it's overwhelmed.
Upstairs is the children's ward. 10-year-old Fatma was so badly hurt by Israeli fire, she can't talk. Her younger sister Maha lies next to her. Dr. Awad Ihsan tickles her feet. Maha can't feel it. She's completely paralyzed. He tries to comfort her. She doesn't know her mother and 2 sisters died in the blast that left her frozen in this bed. Dr. Awad says they can't help her here.
Our services here is not so sophisticated to treat cases like this.
Dr. Awad heads to the ER. Children on gurneys seem to be everywhere.
This is a Palestinian child guilty of the most horrible crime to be born Palestinian in Gaza.
This ground offensive has lasted only a few days. Already, hundreds are dead and thousands wounded.
And just tonight, Brian, Israel struck an apartment building here in Gaza City. When rescue workers moved into the building collapsed on top of them. At least 20 people were killed. And it's just one more event that shows how important this ceasefire could be.
Our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, in Gaza City for us tonight. Richard, thanks. In Israel tonight, thousands of people crowded into the military cemetery in the seaside city of Haifa, offering comfort to the family of Sergeant Sean Carmeli, a 21-year-old who fought for Israel but was raised in the U.S. He was one of 2 Americans killed this weekend while serving in the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. Last night in L.A., a candlelight vigil for Max Steinberg, a sharpshooter in the Israeli army. There are close to 2,000 Americans serving right now in the Israeli military. Earlier today, we spoke with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is under increasing fire for the civilian deaths we've seen in Gaza, while insisting he must defend his country from relentless rocket attacks.
You know, at a certain point, you say, what choice have you got? What would you do? What would you do if American cities, where you're sitting now, Brian, would be rocketed, would absorb hundreds of rockets? You know what you'd say? You'd say to your leader, a man's got to do what a man's got to do, and you'd say a country's got to do what a country's got to do. We have to defend ourselves. We try to do it with the minimum amount of force, or with targeting military targets as best as we can, but we'll act to defend ourselves. No country can live like this.
Let's talk about these civilian deaths. Last night, our network aired scenes of the largest hospital in Gaza having to turn away dead bodies at the hospital morgue. There was no more room. You've seen the widely chronicled story of the boys on the beach in Gaza who were killed. How does it strike you as a father, as a human being?
It's very saddening. To see any of these civilian deaths is terribly saddening, and we regret every one of them, and we don't seek to have even one civilian death. We're targeting Hamas terrorists. I can tell you that we opened up a hospital, a field hospital, a humanitarian field hospital on the edge of Gaza, and Hamas doesn't let the people come there. They're hiding rockets in hospitals, they're hiding arms in hospitals, they're shooting from hospitals. So they just don't care. I mean, they break every norm in the book, every rule in the book, committing triple war crimes, targeting civilians, hiding behind civilians, piling civilians in places where they'll be put in harm's way. I think to the extent there is any blame, it should be laid squarely to Hamas's door, because these are not symmetrical conditions.
It is the situation, Mr. Prime Minister, that civilians are dying in droves, that we've seen pictures of children wandering the streets of Gaza, no longer with homes to return to. Our president just this morning called again for a ceasefire. Are you willing to talk to Hamas in any form, and what are you willing to agree to when Secretary Kerry gets to work there?
Well, we've agreed 3 times, as I said, to successive ceasefires, and I think the most important initiative, and really the only initiative, is the Egyptian initiative, supported by the Arab League, supported by the Palestinian Authority, supported by Israel, supported by the UN. If Hamas wants to end this, they could have supported it. I think John Kerry will come here, and I think he should stand behind this initiative. If people want to end it, it could end.
Part of our conversation with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu from earlier today. In response to our conversation with the Prime Minister, Hamas tells NBC News in a statement tonight, quote, "It is Netanyahu and his army of war criminals that have targeted and continue to target innocent and defenseless civilians. As for Hamas, every single Israeli killed by its fighters or its rockets, except one, have been soldiers in uniform, on duty, fully armed, and on the battlefield." End of quote from Hamas.